Cheryl Hansen, how are you? You look wonderful.
I'm great, thank you.
Where
I'm
are
enjoying
you?
the Arizona sun.
Good for you. Where in Arizona?
I'm down in Tucson. I just got
Nice.
got here a month ago, and it's been interesting. I had to laugh. They said, "Well, we've returned to winter because overnight it was 45 degrees, and it might only get in the low or to mid 60s today." So we're back in winter. I'm in a got kind of a sweater on and
Oh, neat.
ready for it. But yeah, so it's been an interesting transition.
Well, I'm in Central Oregon in the Sisters area, and I just sent a picture to my daughter of snow on my deck that had finally melted down into a little chunk, and I said, "This has been here since you left," and she visited in February.
Oh boy.
Then I had to send her another one this morning. Said spoke too soon because we got another dusting of snow this morning.
Well, I think it was 2 weeks after I got here, I woke up, they had said overnight that there might be snow in the mountains. And what I didn't realize, I live at the base of the Catalinas.
Sure.
And they said, well, there might be some snow in the mountains. I thought, okay. Got up in the morning, looked out, there were like there's 2 inches of snow on the ground. I was
Wow.
like, what the heck? So that was kind of my welcome to Tucson and to living at the base of the mountain. But it of course went away immediately because by afternoon it was 55 degrees.
So I find it interesting. We're going to get to all the stuff in your wonderful career. Teresa Richardson, who replaced you on PM Magazine, also it lives in Tucson.
Oh, she does?
Yes.
Oh, you're kidding me. TR's down here?
Uh-huh.
Oh my gosh, that's another person I know down here.
Yeah, I did a podcast with her that aired just last week, and yeah, she and her husband live on a ranch out there in Tucson.
Oh my gosh, you know what? I'm going to message her on Facebook
Yeah.
and find out where she is. I would love to see her. That would be really a lot of fun.
What a great reunion.
Yeah, cool.
So how did a Midwest girl end up in Portland, Oregon?
Oh boy. Back in the dark ages. No, actually, I started working in media, in broadcast, when I was in college, 19, 20 years old. There was a woman, her name was Lita Powell Drake, and she was literally the only woman who was on television on the only local station in Lincoln, Nebraska, which was KOLN TV. It was a CBS affiliate. Most of the news came in from Omaha. So she was also involved in the theater department at the university, and I was very involved there. So she approached me one day and she said, I have the station has a client who's looking for a different female voice, because Lita was everywhere. Every commercial that required a woman's voice, it was Lita. Anyway, so she said, would you be interested in some voiceover work? I had no idea what she meant, but I thought work sounds like a college student, work, yay. So I agreed to do that. And then shortly thereafter, the station asked me if I was interested in serving as host for a 3-hour telethon. And I'd never done any on-camera work, but I said, sure, I'll do that. That sounds like fun.
You've been on stage, so you've done that, right?
Yeah, but I had never done actual television. So I went in to do this 3-hour telethon. And what I didn't know at the time that I agreed to it was every break, I had to change clothes because there was a clothing sponsor. And I had no help. So I would literally dash off stage and I'd run back with whatever outfit I'd grabbed off the rolling rack. Half the time I wasn't zipped up, I wasn't buckled, my blouse wasn't complete. It was a total disaster. But the main disaster, and this is something I will never forget, I don't know, you were probably too young to remember, they used to have, when stereo was a really big kind of wow deal, they had these egg-shaped chairs, and they had stereo speakers inside of these white, they looked like a big egg, egg-shaped chairs, and they had these big stereo speakers. And so somebody on the crew said, what would be really cool is if we started on the back of the chair and the egg turned around and there was Cheryl. Okay, I'm game, I'll try. So we never rehearsed it, of course, live TV. I get in the egg, I twirl around, and the egg falls off the pedestal, and I roll away. Well, that was my first experience with broadcast TV. And from there, I ended up kind of as a fluke. I went on an audition for Weather Girl in Omaha. And they asked me to come back and talk to them about the job. And I said, no, I'm a teacher. I'm really not interested. We just kind of did this for fun. And the woman decided that she would stay there because they had a weather girl. She decided to stay. When she was getting ready to leave again, they called me and said, are you interested now?
Mm-hmm.
And offered me literally twice the money I was making as a teacher.
Yeah.
At that time, I think I was trying to remember back, and I think it was like they offered me $28,000. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't turn that down. Because as a teacher, I think I was making like 14 maybe.
Right.
So I started my career at KMTV, which was an NBC affiliate in Omaha, Nebraska. And I just got a call one day after I'd been there a little over a year from Mark Gatier, who was the news director at KGW, asking if I was interested in coming to Oregon. And I was like, Oregon?
Where's that?
Where the heck is that? But anyway, I talked to, not Mark Gatier, who was Dave Livingston was the news director at the time. And I talked to my news director, who was Mark, and he said, you ought to go take a look at it. You really should. It's a good opportunity to get out on the West Coast.
Yeah.
Well, I came out to Portland, and yeah, it was a big move. I was 29, maybe 28, 29, and came out to Portland, knew one person, and that was it.
Oh, wow. Now, sign of the times, I would never call a woman doing the weather now a weather girl.
Oh, yeah.
But back then, that unfortunately, that's what you were, and that needed to be changed, and eventually over time. But I mean, that was, here's the weather girl. They probably said that on air.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the thing about it was that was one of the very few entry points at that time for women. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know Kathy did one of these casts with you, and she was talking about how she got started as a producer. I remember in the newsroom in Omaha, there was one woman, Rosemary, and she was a producer. Mm-hmm. But that was truly an entry point. Joan London, Diane Sawyer, they all started as weather girls, as we're all kind of in that same age range. And that was really the first way you could get your foot in the door. And if you wanted to move on to something else, then that was how you started. Because women were fairly scarce, except in, back off kinds of jobs.
Somebody had to break that glass ceiling, and you guys did it, even though the name they called you Weather Girl was something we needed to change over time.
And it did. And the other thing was too, to be a weather girl during my time, you didn't need to know anything about the weather. And thank God for Jack Capel. I will bless his heart. I will never forget how kind he was to me. He took me aside one day and he said, okay, I'm going to help you out here, and I'm going to tell you how to pronounce some of the things here in the Pacific Northwest so you don't get into trouble. So he went through a bunch of different city names and that sort of thing with me. And he said, but the most important thing is never say Willamette.
Good for him.
Being from the Midwest, it's Willamette, Illinois. I mean, it's Willamette. He said, here's how you remember it. Just say Willamette, damn it. And that was how I learned how to say, the Willamette River.
There you go.
He was so great. He was really kind.
So you mentioned Jack Capel, who was the longtime weathercaster at KGW. Did you start doing weekends, or were you doing 11 o'clock? What did they have you come in to do?
I was thrown into the fray of doing the evening newscasts, the 5:30 and the 5 o'clock and the 11, with Robin Chapman, Ralph Wingy, and John North.
Yeah.
When they were doing the 3 people on the set thing. But I only did the weather for about, I don't know if I don't think I even did it for 2 years. And then Robin left and she went to Washington, D.C. And so they moved me over to the evening show, and that left very shortly thereafter. I mean, they quit producing that locally and bought into the PM Magazine franchise.
Right. Well, these are the good old days. That's the name of the podcast. I have. I will tell you that I do remember we watched the news at my house when I was growing up. I hate that. I watched you when I was growing up, but and my dad watched the news a lot, and that's probably why I got into it. And I do remember I may have seen your first weathercast at Channel 8 or very close to it because it was such a shock to see. I guess Robin was there, but every time a woman got it on the air, that was so new. It's like, look who's doing the weather. So I remember when you started.
Good, because I don't.
Oh,
I just remember I came to town with my Farrah Fawcett hair. They were like, yeah, we're going to do something there. But yeah, I'm trying to think. That was in 1977, November of 1977, because I remember people, when I first came to the Northwest, people said, oh, you picked a horrible time to come to the Pacific Northwest. It's November, blah, blah, blah. And I said, hey, I'm from Nebraska. You have no idea what a relief it is to come to Oregon and have it be 45 overnight and 55 during the day and have it be raining and not have snow up to here and, 10 below zero with a wind chill of 30 below. So
yeah,
no, not a problem.
Yeah, if you were still doing weather in Nebraska now, they'd make you go out and stand live in all that snow throughout the entire winter.
I know. I remember a couple of times that they wanted to do something up on the roof of KGW because there's a weather station on the roof.
Right. Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, no, I don't think that's a good idea. The wind blowing, the rain's coming down. So.
I seem to remember a name, Janine Navarro.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Was I think the first woman? She might have been before Robin Chapman or about the same time. That was which was a news reporter, she wasn't there long enough for when I got to KGW in 1982, but there were. It was a men's club, and you had to navigate through that. I'm glad Jack Capel was helpful for you, but I'm guessing that not everybody there was pro-woman on the set.
Well, what was interesting was there were great guys like Haney, John Haney.
Photographer John Haney.
What was his name? Dave Tinkham.
Yes.
Joe Marks, Roger Thompson, just absolutely great guys who were very, very supportive. There were, however, and I'm not going to name names, but there were a couple of real chauvinists and very patronizing, I hesitate to say demeaning because they really weren't demeaning, but I felt like I kept expecting somebody to pat me on the head, like their pet.
Yeah.
You're very sweet and cute. Pat me on the head. There were a couple of those, but for the most part, I think most people were pretty welcoming. There were a couple of guys that I felt were a little disdainful because they didn't think I had the correct credentials, particularly when it came to doing evening. But
evening was one of, I think, Portland market treasures. That was the first kind of magazine show. It was done all locally, and I know Dick Klinger and Robin Chapman hosted it originally. And I was always amazed at Robin Chapman's schedule because she was anchoring the news and doing a story for evening and hosting it. That was a lot to ask. You replaced her then with was Dick still there?
I don't remember, to tell you the truth. I don't remember working with him.
So it would have been Paul then, Paul Lindman.
I think it was Paul. And I think when they bought PM Magazine, they just shifted the both of us to PM Magazine. Because we didn't do evening for very long.
Yeah.
I think, the formula that they used for evening was something that really worked with Dick and Robin. They had the right kind of chemistry. They had the right kind of journalistic credentials. And I think it just worked for them, and it didn't work as well for us, but the PM Magazine franchise worked very well. So
And that was an institution for probably 20 years, where there were, I think, 70 or 80 markets around the country. They all shared material. You hosted it from your market, and you guys would produce stories and pick out. You would produce them for Portland, and you'd pick out other stories from other markets, and then go around the community or the whole Northwest, and sometimes the whole world, and host that show. That was a juggernaut when you were there.
It was. I was involved with PM Magazine for, I think, about 8 years, and it really was, and it was a huge moneymaker.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a cash cow. They were making money hand over fist. We were really kind of on the cusp of the whole advertorial kinds of pieces that you see now on like AM Northwest, where John's Car Wash buys 3 minutes and a reporter goes out and talks about John's Car Wash because he's bought 3 minutes. Well, we were kind of, in some of the stories that we did, that's kind of what was going on. The sales department would suggest that maybe we wanted to kind of help this client. And we were all kind of put off a little bit by that we felt like we had to promote the sales department's clients. But most of the time it was stories that someone enterprised or that came to us. We were told about different things and found different people. And then, of course, there were always the junkets, the Hollywood junkets, where you would go down and you would interview people who were starting a new series or something like that. I think I counted up one time, and I think we went to a Disney property like Disneyland or Disney World when I was there 16 times.
Well, that's a nice benefit of a job, isn't it?
Well, after about the 10th, no. No, actually, the most interesting thing about Disneyland was or Disney World is where this happened. We got to do a overnight behind the scenes shoot where we got to see what the crew did when the people weren't there, and how they maintained the rides, and how much. I mean, they had statistics. It was hysterical, like how many pounds of gum they scraped each night, how many cans of garbage they emptied. It truly was fascinating. That, and going to lunch in the character commissary, where all the characters are sitting around with their heads off. So there were some truly wonderful memories, but I always left with "It's a Small World" in my head.
No kidding. That's really amazing, because Disney probably would not let you do that now. It's very protective of that, everything behind the happiest place on earth.
Yeah. No, I don't think they would either. And it was always interesting. One of the things that they would say to us every time we went was, "We cannot disturb the guest's experience."
Right.
That was, and I understand that, and they were very careful about placing us on rides ahead of guests. And we would sometimes have to go like early in the morning before the park opened to do, if they had like a new feature that they wanted to show, we'd have to do it. And they have their people sitting on the ride so that we didn't disturb the guest's actual experience.
My first assignment when I went from KGW to KATU to host AM Northwest was I went to Chicago to do a preview show on The Lion King, which was showing in Chicago and coming to Portland.
Oh, okay.
It was fascinating. I mean, I really loved that. We did a half an hour. Helen Raptis did a couple of stories, and then I did stuff from Chicago and talked to the stars that were coming, basically to promote the fact that it was coming, and we were a sponsor of Portland. But I remember when we were shooting our B-roll of the show itself, not behind the stage, but I mean the show, there was a Disney person next to us and told my photographer, who was Bob, I'll get it, but when he could roll and when he could not roll, because they only wanted certain parts of the show represented before, they certainly didn't want you to shoot where, Mustafa dies or those kind of things. And yeah, I mean, so it was very limited. We could only shoot the first act. We could only shoot, they limited us to about 12 or 13 minutes. And the Disney person was there saying, "You can roll, you have to stop." you can roll, you have to stop. Yeah, very protective.
Yeah, so much so.
Well, and I mean, you can just probably list off dozens of places that PM magazine took you to around the world, not to mention just around Oregon, right?
Right. We were really very fortunate. I think probably my most memorable trip was to Nepal.
Nice.
We went there. Regan Ramsey, who I adore, was our producer at the time, and he knew Lute Jerstead, who was like the first American to set foot on Everest, on the summit of Everest. And Lute had an adventure company in Nepal, and so we went over there, and that was a fabulous trip. Among other things, I think we were there for 3 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, and stayed all over and had, wild bus rides on the sides of mountains. And I'll never forget, we went into one village and there was some big controversy going on in the village. Apparently they had jailed someone locally and the people were in an uproar about it. And our bus driver told Paul and I both to get down on the floor of the bus.
No.
Because we were blonde and they
Yeah.
were afraid for our well-being. So that was a bit of an adventure. And there's just all kinds of stuff that happened to us while we were there. I sprained my ankle and I ended up having to ride a white pony through the villages on the way up the Annapurnas. And, and I remember Lute saying that, these people are going to really wonder who you are riding through these, kind of primitive villages on my white pony. But yeah, we got to do a lot of things and travel to a lot of different places. And probably, went to like Hollywood for those junkets.
Yeah.
Every year, maybe twice a year. I'll never forget. I did get to interview O.J. Simpson and Bruce Jenner before the Olympics, in which they were both being commentators.
Right.
That was very interesting.
Yeah. At that time, it was very different, wasn't it?
Yes, it was very different. It was different. Yeah, that was an interesting experience. Another one that I loved was we went down to LA to do a story on Doc Severinsen, since he was from Oregon. He's an Oregonian.
Yeah, from Arlington. Arlington.
Yeah. So we went down to do an interview with him, and this was so interesting. One of their people came up to us and they said, "Look, if you see Johnny, don't try to talk to him. Start a conversation. Don't do anything." And I would just happen to be talking to somebody else. And I said, "Well, I'm a Nebraskan. I'm from Nebraska too." And I said, "I've always appreciated Johnny Carson because he's done so much for Nebraska and for the university and for Norfolk, which was his home, and blah, 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 blah." So pretty soon, about 10 minutes later, gal comes up to me and she said, "Mr. Carson would like to see you."
Yes.
It was like, yay! So I spent about 15 minutes with him and just chatting with him in his dressing room about, being from Nebraska and what it was like growing up there and how different it was from the places that we were now. And he was just super. He was so gracious and so nice. And I thought, here's another really good example of how the people surrounding these famous people feel the need to protect them like they do.
Sure. Yeah.
He was just a super guy. He was just as kind and nice and friendly. And so I remember that one very clearly.
Well, you mentioned, and we talked about, the places that PM Magazine took you. Back then in the 80s, King Broadcasting, owned by the Bullitt family, we spent a lot of money traveling to a lot of places. Every place that you guys went, John Tuttle and Kevin Feltz, photographer, they went to Vietnam. When the economy was just opening up back up to Americans. Ann Curry went to Nicaragua with a group of Oregonians that were going there. I interviewed Mike Donahue early on in this podcast. He went to China with the governor when that trade was happening. That was it was a great time to be a journalist because to get the good stories about us as a global community, they weren't afraid to spend the money that it took to do that.
And they don't really do that anymore. I mean, it's not. Actually, after I finished with PM Magazine, I went to work in Seattle at Cairo,
Mm-hmm.
and I did an international travel show with them, which was the best job in the world.
I bet.
That was a good way to round off my regular career in broadcasting. So I spent 8 years doing that.
So, you and Paul were hosting PM Magazine. It was a show that people timed out to watch every day. But when you only had 4 channels to watch, if you didn't get home in time for the news, you tuned in at 7:30, which was access time for the local stations. So, I mean, you guys were pretty big celebrities in Oregon. I know that people were I think were clamoring to be the sponsor that got to get you clothes, because at the end of the show it said Cheryl Hansen's wardrobe provided by whomever. That had to be fun.
It was fun. I mean, well, and it was great because I didn't have to worry about what I was wearing. I could go in, and it was the Mercantile, and I could go in and they would have a rolling rack full of clothes, and at that point I would know what our locations were, so that I would be dressed appropriately. So if we were going to go to Pittock Mansion, I would want something that was much, much nicer, and maybe a dress and that sort of thing. Or if we were going to go to a vineyard, I'd want to be a bit more casual. So I would have the rundown of where we were going to do our stand-ups, where we were going to do all of our raps for the coming week. I'd take the clothes back that I had used the week before, and then I would say, okay, so this week here's what I need, and they would go through the rolling rack and pull out 5 outfits for me, and I'd try them on, and if they worked, great, and if not, we'd find something else. So it was actually really nice, because I didn't have to worry at all about what I was going to wear from one day to the next.
Yeah, that's one thing off your plate. We know what on Monday I walk in, I know what I'm wearing next week, right?
Exactly. And the interesting thing, I think, that a lot of viewers think, is that we have a whole hair and makeup team, and
not at that level.
No, not at all. Not at all. You're responsible for doing your own thing. And I think it's always kind of a surprise to people when they would say, well, now who does your hair and makeup? Does somebody come in first thing in the morning, or how do you do that? And I'm like, yeah, that'd be me. Get out of the shower, I put my hair, and I put on my makeup.
Here's the person who taught me how to do TV makeup was sports guy Scott Lynn. That was my media makeup consultant for 31 years.
There you go. Well, I was lucky in that I had done a lot of modeling type work ahead of actually starting working full-time in television. So I'd had a lot of people work on my face, and I kind of knew what I should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Just do it a little heavier. So but that again, we didn't really have any formal training. I know they sent me back to Magid, which is the
consulting agency,
consulting agency back in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. They sent me back there, and I don't even remember why, to tell you the truth. But that was one of the things they did do, was they went kind of through makeup techniques and that sort of thing. That truly was the only actual instruction I ever got.
Did you help Paul Lindman dress?
No.
You didn't help pick out his stuff at the Mercantile? No.
I don't believe he had a clothing sponsor. I don't remember, though. To be honest with you, I don't remember if he had a clothing sponsor. I know that they felt it was really important because, thank goodness, I have to say, thank goodness, I'm not working on the air right now, because I feel sorry for the kids or the people who are doing it now, because they've got the social media thing and the criticism. And we used to get, I don't know if you remember this, at KGWD, who was the receptionist at the front desk.
All the phone calls
From people with their comments and stuff. And bless her heart, Dee would always, I'd walk by and she'd say, oh, you got a nice compliment. They loved your pink sweater. And she never once did she say to me, oh, so-and-so called and they said, nah, about you.
So she would take the calls at the front desk and she would type down viewer comments, which at that point for a day might have been 12 or 15 or whatever, you know. But I remember they used to copy that and they put it in the commissary for people to read while they were having their lunch, like it was the newspaper. So everybody knew if Cheryl Hansen wore something that people didn't like, everybody in the newsroom, everybody in the whole station knew about it because it was on that little list.
Yep, and I avoided reading that completely. I did not want to know because it, you know, it's very, and you get mail, you get good mail and you get bad mail. And it has always fascinated me that people felt like it was okay to be critical of that kind of thing. You know, it's one thing to be critical of a story or a report, but it's something else to be critical of the way somebody dresses or looks on the air. And that, I can't imagine now what that must be like for the
Yeah,
people.
I was always aware of the women that I was working with had that kind of feedback through letters and things like that. And now, you know, you don't have to take the time to write it out, put a stamp on it and put it in the mail. You just go to your computer and a couple of clicks with your finger and you can be a troll. And I would imagine you just have to avoid that. If you get caught up in that, you're going to just drive yourself crazy.
Yeah, I would certainly think so. I mean, there were so many, for me, there were so many wonderful things that I got to do as a part of PM Magazine that that was something I just didn't want to see, that kind of thing. You know, we had so much fun and we got to do so many things and see so many things and meet so many great people. And some of them were like just, you know, local people who were doing really cool things, like Bob over at Bob's Red Mill. He's a hoot. He was great. I mean, and Gert Boyle, she was another one. We got acquainted with her. In fact, we went over to Sapporo, which is the sister city of Portland. And when we went to Sapporo, Gert provided us with the very first Thinsulate, which was a big new wowie cold weather fabric that they had created with these huge blue Thinsulate jackets with PM Magazine on them. And that for me started a years-long friendship with Gert. But you know, those were the kind of people that we got to meet.
Yeah.
I do think that probably my favorite, I don't know, there were so many, but one of my favorite people that I got to interview was Ginger Rogers.
Nice.
That was truly a treat. Her retirement home was in Medford. And it was a little rustic, kind of nice, elegant cabin, but it was a little rustic place that was close to, I don't know what river, but yeah, that was wonderful. It was very old Hollywood. The assistant came out to greet us. We went in, we put up all the lights, and the crew put up all the lights. And then the assistant came out with a light meter to check to see if they were going to be appropriate for Miss Rogers. She let us know that Miss Rogers would be out soon. And so she went away. She came back in. She announced Miss Rogers. And Miss Rogers came out. She was delightful. She was just delightful. And after we were done, the photographer, and I cannot remember who it was, might have been Joe Marks. Anyway, the photographer wanted to get some B-roll and around the area because it was very lovely.
The old walk-in shot.
Yeah, the old walking shot. So we went out and she took my arm and we went out and we walked down by this river and she stopped and she said, "Listen, can you hear that?" And I'm stretching my ear trying to hear anything. And I said, "Well, what are you hearing?" And she said, "Well, the fish are singing. Can you hear that?" I said,
"Sure."
What a wonderful sentiment. But she was truly lovely. That. I loved her. I love Hank Aaron. I got a chance to meet him. He was very cool too. And then there were a few.
So your Hank Aaron story is much better than Kathy Smith's Mickey Mantle story. Here's a hint: go back and watch the Kathy Smith podcast because it's your.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that was horrific. That was just horrific. Now I had one of those. Mine was with Darren McGavin.
Oh, from Love Boat?
No, not Darren McGavin. I don't want to say the wrong name. He was what was his name? It was Darren something.
What was the show?
Night Stalker? I can't remember. Anyway, he was horrible. He was just horrible. It's not to that extent, but bad. He was
okay.
But no, Hank Aaron, class all the way. Cool guy. Very cool guy.
One of my joys in the 31 years was moving to K2 to host AM Northwest for a couple of years with Helen. And, we do a lot of satellite interviews then, but we would have people come through. And my treasure was getting to interview Peter Yarrow from Peter, Paul and Mary.
Oh,
Having, loving folk music and learn how to play the guitar, and to hear him sing. He came in town because I think he had family. He sang with his daughter and son-in-law for us. And he was a hoot. he kind of took over the show. Our producers were saying rap, and Peter still wanted to talk, so we kept going and going and going.
sing something. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's one of the true privileges of working in broadcast, is that you do get a chance to meet. And sometimes they're like an idol or somebody that you've watched since you were a little kid or something like that. That's the delight. And I hope that people are still feeling that. In today's media, it's so different now than it was when you and I were real active.
So I believe that Paul left, and did you host with Dave Sullivan for a while?
I did.
Dave came to be our weekend sports guy. Came from Yakima, tall, dark-haired, gorgeous blue eyes, and then he was only with us in sports for about 6 months before they bumped him up to host with you.
Yep, and he stayed for about a year, and then he left, and then Craig Walker and I hosted together for about a year. And that was fun. Craig, it was really interesting because Craig had his own audience and his own celebrity to begin with. And gosh, he was a great guy to work with. He's just a really nice guy.
I hope people know what a wonderful man he is. I was lucky enough, again, I listened to him when I was a teenager, got to work with him, got to know him, and we still stay in touch because he has a house here where I live at Black Butte Ranch.
Okay.
And I see him a couple times a year. And what a lovely man. We were so lucky to have him in Portland and to get to work with him.
What a great family man.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know that people know that if they just, listen to him on the radio or saw him on PM Magazine, because, there's a sense of your on-air personality, which his was wonderful. But yeah, a great family guy. We were lucky to have him, and I'm glad he's still healthy after his liver transplant. He's been going on for years and years and years.
Yeah, I actually saw him probably about a year ago now, maybe a little more than that, come to think of it, because we've all lived through 2020 and not seen anyone. So, but I saw him, our mutual friend, Mary Volm had Mary had an art opening down in Newburgh, and I ran into him at her art opening. So it was really great to see him. I hadn't seen him for quite some time.
So you hosted with Paul Lindman and Craig and Dave Sullivan. Now, I remember hearing, and I don't mean to offend by saying this, but I just always thought it was funny. But the theory for PM Magazine was you needed hosts who looked like they were having an affair, even though they weren't. Did you ever hear that?
No, I never heard that.
Okay. Well, then obviously somebody in management thought that it looked like you may have had affairs with those guys. I mean, I know that they wanted that kind of chemistry or that kind of,
Well, I think that's a good point. It's really important. I know we saw a whole lot of couples, PM Magazine couples, and it was really clear when they either didn't like each other or there wasn't good chemistry, because inevitably what would happen is, as I think anybody who watched the show recall, you'd open the show, there'd be the two of you, and then sometimes there'd be the two of you introducing a story, and sometimes you would just have one of you introducing the story. But you could always tell when the hosts did not do well together because they were never together on screen. They might be at the very end, they might come together to go like this.
Wow.
But yeah, it was fairly clear when people, were, and you could tell. Yeah. So the chemistry thing was always good. And I felt fortunate that I got along with all of my co-hosts.
That's a key to enjoying your job, isn't it?
Exactly. I think it's really important. And, you know, whether you're sitting on a news set or sitting on a live morning TV show, it was just like when Helen worked with Dave Anderson. That I always appreciated. They had such a wonderful chemistry. And you know, you guys got along so well, and you played off of each other so well. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Well, I can say I co-hosted or anchored newscasts with, about a half dozen women and weather folks from all these years, and I'm glad that I can call them all friends.
Yes.
There were some people in our business that were not easy to work with, and I hope I was never that, but I was always lucky enough to work with people that you enjoyed being there.
Exactly. And I feel pretty much the same way. I had one producer that I did not care for, and that's about the extent of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, other than that, for the most part, everybody was great to work with. There was good camaraderie, and you know, when you travel with people,
Yo, no kidding.
You find out whether or not you get along. And that, especially when I was doing the other show for Cairo, we were gone for weeks at a time. And when you're traveling, people would say, oh, isn't that wonderful? You got to go to Nepal for 3 weeks. Well, yes, it was wonderful, but
it's work.
It's work. And literally you're working from the time you get up in the morning until, you know, you go to bed at night, and you get up the next morning and you go again. And while what you see during that period of time, any normal person would take 6 or 8 weeks to see, because you're on the run the whole time. But it's still, you know, I loved every last minute of the travel. That was terrific.
And so you said it was about 8 years at European Magazine. You decided to leave on your own, I hope? No?
Continued. No, what was it? They said I wanted to pursue other interests, and then they offered me a job in the sales department, and I didn't want to do that. That just didn't feel like something I wanted to do. So, and as it turned out, I was offered this position doing the show in Seattle, which turned out to be a wonderful gig. I mean, it truly was great. And I didn't have a co-host there. I did the show myself. Although every once in a while, this is interesting, every once in a while they would pair me with the guy who was doing the gardening show, Jeff Propst.
Oh. Jeff Propst? Wow.
From Survivor.
You started a juggernaut there. Good for you.
It was very interesting because I don't even know how I saw this, but I saw Jeff's his work history. For some reason, he didn't mention the gardening show in Seattle. But yeah, every once in a while they would pair us just, you know, for something else. You know, I'd do the gardening show with him, or he'd do the travel show with me if we were in the Seattle area working. And he's a great guy, really a nice guy. But I look back on that and I think, wow, he stepped in it there, man. Yeah. He's gotten himself. Right.
We all needed to invest in Jeff Propst. We needed a little part of that action.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. But yeah, so most of that, I mean, that work, I mostly did that as the same kind of show, you know, It was introduce and run a story, but we produced all of our own stories. So.
Yeah, and you know, those things happen. I've had the joy of talking to so many great colleagues about you know, jobs that they didn't get, or jobs that they were removed from that led to other things. And you know, in the moment we all think, you know, what a horrible thing, but people with the talent that you have and the ability you have find other places to be able to express that, and it just creates this vivid, colorful journey of a career and a life. So I'm glad that Cairo came out for you for doing that.
It was great. It was great. I remember when I first came to Portland, the first 2 weeks that I was in Portland, I had an offer from KPIX in San Francisco to come down there and do their weather. And an offer from whatever, I can't remember, in North Carolina, they wanted me to come and do news. And I couldn't do it. And then probably, I don't remember how many years later, I was asked to audition for KTLA.
KTLA's, yeah. I think that's
It was like a
ABC.
morning show in LA. Eye on LA was the name of the show, and
Okay.
they contacted me about that. And they said it's a morning show, and I'm like, nope, I don't do mornings. Period. I never have. I was always great at the evening stuff. When you do the 5 and the 11 o'clock, I was great at that. But yeah, no, not mornings.
Yeah, I made the mistake of not saying no to the mornings, and that led to 18 years of mornings.
I never have been able to, because every once in a while, for a while there, I was doing pet expert segments for Helen on AM Northwest. And even getting there to do those, I was like, oh my God, it's 8:30 in the morning and they want me to be there. So I was never particularly good at morning television. So I admire anybody who can do that.
Well, I think you were our guest when Helen and I were there for a couple of those, and I think you did fine.
I don't remember. I was still asleep.
What takes up your time now? You said you're in Tucson. What do you love? What do you do with your time?
Well, I just gotten here. Literally a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a couple of old KGW people here. Casey Cowan is here.
Casey's not old. She's just
a former. How about former?
Yeah, she hasn't aged a bit.
Former KGW people, and then her name at the time was Cindy Hansen, who was on KGW Radio.
I remember Cindy. Yeah,
he's here as well, and then I have a couple of other friends who are here. But at this point, I'm just trying to find my way to the grocery store. I'm doing well. I'm doing pretty well. I figured out where all the important places like the grocery store and Target and those places are. But I think that the thing that attracted me to Tucson is, first of all, it's really a beautiful area. It's gorgeous. And there's lots of hiking and biking and a lot of active stuff to do. And I think once I get myself settled, I'm going to figure out either some volunteer work that I want to do, or I don't know, maybe do some more writing. I've been doing a little writing. So
awesome. I was lucky enough, Jill, my wife and I took a guided bike tour in Tucson about, 7 years ago. And the Socorro National Park with the cactuses, we got down to Patagonia. It surprised me because it's not as desert as you think of Arizona.
Exactly.
There's cattle grazing land. I just didn't know that much about the geography,
right.
And it is a beautiful place.
Yep. I really didn't know quite where I wanted to go. And I tend to be a mountain person over being an ocean person. I like the mountains, but I don't like snow. So I was kind of like, And then I started coming down here to visit, and I decided that this might be a pretty good location for me. So I found this cute little adobe house with the, archways, and it's a single story, so there's no stairs to climb, and packed the dogs in the car and headed on down. So I think we're going to do okay here.
Awesome. Well, Cheryl, I can't thank you enough for spending time chatting with this. It's so much fun to revisit with folks. I'm glad that our paths crossed back in the 80s at KGW and again right here. So thanks for doing this.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.